welcome to Mature Matters. My name is Cindy Gray. I'm your host today, and I'm here for a second visit with Jeff Collison. And Jeff, you're the publisher and owner of the Best of Aging magazine.
Yes, and thanks for having me back, Cindy.
You're welcome, yeah. When we last met and spoke, we were talking about, or started to get into the housing guide that you've produced for the summer. It's twice a year, and this is the summer issue. A comprehensive guide to senior housing and resources for Southeast Michigan. What can you tell me about this?
Well, first of all, this is again one of the things that's near and dear to my heart as far as getting the information out to our readership. We produce this once in January and once in July. And it's information as to how to live in a particular place. And that place could be your own home, that could be an assisted living, that could be in your adult son's or adult daughter's house. There are so many different options out there that oftentimes, you know, the readership or people don't know all the options. They're only given the fact that, okay, you have to move, you have to go to a nursing home, you have to go and do this because there are no other options.
Okay.
Well, fortunately, because of either my background as well as mostly the background that I've had, you know, experiences from my friends and family and readers, there are many, many more options out there.
Okay, can you give us an example?
Sure. And part of it, relays back to some of my history, and we talked a little bit on the last show as to how it was in the olden days, you know, where generations of people would live together. You had a grandma and grandpa living with their adult child and their grandchildren and all of that. And they'd oftentimes move every few years to another adult child. And this was back in that actually lasted up until the 50s, you know, 40s, 50s for the most part, and then it started to become more institutionalized.
In our culture.
In our culture only.
Because I know I've got some Slavic friends whose elderly relatives all live with them.
Yes.
And there's no question that this is unusual for them. That's how they do it.
Absolutely. And what, you know, part of the things that happens is that we started putting our parents and our grandparents into institutions, whether it be nursing homes in the 50s and 60s, where it was started to getting to its heydays in the 70s, and then the new realm over the last 20 years has been the assisted living and all the different various options that you could have for, you know, placing your parents or your grandparents into these places. But that's not the only option. In fact, my wife and I were fortunate enough to have her mother come live with us for several years, as opposed to going straight into a nursing home. And that was when our children at that time were 7 and 9. I have a son and a daughter. And even though it was hard, you know, it has challenges, and she had, you know, a moderate form at that time of Alzheimer's. It was difficult. It was probably the best experience of my life and of my wife's life and my children's lives, because they always remember back. Remember when Grandma did this? Remember when Grandma did that? And, you know, even though it was hard because they didn't always want to hear Grandma tell them what to do or what not to do, they learned so much during that experience. So that opened our eyes, my wife's and I's eyes, you know, as far as a different option that you can actually do it on your own. As far as that's concerned, it's important to know that there are other options.
Okay. And often too of the elders that share in that sort of housing and living situation can help with child care. They can help with things if they're physically able to and able to, I suppose, in other ways.
Absolutely. And that's part of it. As long as they're educated as to you know, the resources that are available. And for example, in our case, we found great comfort in United Way as far as some of the programs they offered for adult daycare to offer somewhat respite for my wife, you know, here and there.
And a change of pace for your mother-in-law too.
Exactly. Some activities as far as that's concerned. But oftentimes on the negative side, you know, what we've seen, and we hear the stories all the time. In fact, I mentioned it in my opening article in the housing guide, where actually an adult child has no options, and they're frustrated. And they're, one of the stories I relate is the fact that my daughter was actually in an emergency room facility and waiting room, and she overheard this really loud conversation between an adult, son and his seemingly, I think it was an 80-some-year-old mother, and he was frustrated beyond the breaking point, where he was saying to her, hey, it's your fault that you fell and broke your hip, and I'm going to put you in a nursing home now. And so there has to be education, and that's why when I decided to put together this publication, it's for the education and for the the different ways that you can really have a higher quality life, with an older generation, if that's your choice, if that's your ability to do that, or find a better way for them to live somewhere else. And you talked about the last time we talked about the the people sharing a home, as far as that's concerned, being able to do that with the AARP article that you had mentioned.
Yes.
And that's one of the other options.
Right. And that's kind of a step up or step away from living alone on your own. And I wonder about, too, psychologically, if for instance, there is a cooperative housing situation and there's only a certain amount of time, maybe that will be effective, and then the people begin to age and not be able to even care for each other or the building in itself. But it might be something that would delay the frailties, because they would have another stage of independence, another stage in their aging process where they have quality of life and self-respect before they go into another phase where they're more dependent.
Right.
You know?
Absolutely.
I know my mom spent some time in a nursing home, and ironically, in one that I worked at years ago when I was in high school. I worked at, and just out of high school, I worked in 3 different nursing homes, and I felt a real strong link. I should have been a gerontologist, maybe, I don't know. But I wanted to go into nursing and chose not to, because I felt so distressed by what I saw in the nursing homes. And it was hard for me ultimately to place her there, but I took care of her for about a year, and she had several strokes. I couldn't lift her anymore. It got to the point where I couldn't care for her, and I knew that, and she knew it too.
Right.
I
mean, part of the key to what we do, and it's called a housing guide, and it starts with the premise that you can live anywhere, whether it be your own home or your adult child's home or wherever, assisted living. It's just the matter of preparing and having the information of what's about to come in the future of your life. We're all going to be, as you mentioned from the quote the last time, we're all going to be a dependent at some stage of our lives.
Right.
So as long as we know that and accept that and prepare for it, that's the power of information. Yeah,
and you list it all beautifully. A lot of times people would make other choices if they knew what was available.
Right. I mean, on a positive choice, I mean, I relate the story all the time to people. If I have a brother-in-law and sister-in-law, basically they did a unique way of transitioning into the next stage of life. They had the traditional, they've been accumulating stuff for 40, 50 years, and they had a 4,000 square foot home.
Oh, geez.
And they, their children had grown and moved out, and they're left in this 4,000 square foot home. Well, what they did, they decided to sell the home, and they did, and they bought a boat, a sailboat, okay? And they sailed for 2 years on the open water. And during that phase, they were planning their next house, a 1,200 square foot home, all on one level, all with wheelchair, with doors, all the things that you need to age in place. Yeah. And they had prepared this, and they had known that. Now they're not to that stage where they need the wheelchairs or anything like that, but they could get
But
them.
if needed, they're ready.
They're get it.
That's brilliant.
Isn't it? And they were able to do one of their dreams, which was to live on a sailboat. Now, it's not for everybody. It's not for me. I can't live on such a small space. But they loved it. They met so many great people from all over the world. They sailed, down in the Caribbean. They did all the things that they wanted to do, and they loved it.
Should have an article about
I
them
did
in the
actually. I did
magazine.
one of
Oh,
the one
did
of the
you?
early articles.
Oh, I need to read that.
Yeah, I'll send it to you.
I saw a thing on one of the shows that feature a lot of, maybe, I don't know if it was This Old House type thing. It was one of those sorts of shows. And it was about a couple who were building a brand new house. And they couldn't have been beyond much in their 40s, if that. And they were building it thinking that they weren't going to move ever again. That's where they were going to remain.
Right.
And they actually had a lovely pantry in the kitchen, and adjoining it was a stairway upstairs. And you went up 4 steps and there was a landing, and then it turned and 4 steps more. And ultimately he said they chose that sort of stairway configuration because if someone fell, they'd only fall 4 steps.
Right.
Hit the landing, which sounds painful, but anyway, they shortened the blow, I suppose. But the pantry can be made into an elevator in the future. They had it rigged so it could be turned into an elevator in the
There you
future.
go.
I couldn't believe it. It was
There you
beautiful.
go.
Yeah, everything was on floor or on one floor, and they had it too where there were no dividers between the rooms, so it was a free-flowing, rollable, wheelchair-friendly situation.
Right,
Too.
right.
Yeah, and I looked at my own house and thought, I'm in trouble. Everything's on a different level.
But that's the point. Is that if you know that you're going to be to this certain point, you know that you're going to have some dependency. Why not prepare? It doesn't cost any more generally in the long run.
Right.
It doesn't cost anything. In fact, it could cost less. Because you're no longer having to upkeep a 4,000 square foot home. You're no longer going to have to do all these things, have all this space you're not going to need.
And if you do it sooner, I think you've got more of your wits about you to make the decisions.
Absolutely, and you're
in
not
your control.
And you're not burdening another family member to make that decision for you, which is the most important. I think that's the greatest fear that our generation has. We don't want our children to be burdened with having to take care of us necessarily, or to do the things that we may have had to do for our parents because there was no choice, there was no education, there was no options back then. But with nowadays, with the information and all the technology and all the things that have changed over the years, it's possible.
Right.
And it's practical to start doing things in advance.
You have a quote in there too. I noticed something about the best thing about change is creating it.
Yes.
Creating your own changes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Change will always occur, but if you want to have it a positive change, you better create it yourself.
Participate in it.
Yes.
And then you mentioned too something about the term living assisted facility being a marketing term.
Yeah, assisted living, and that sort of drives me a little crazy as a publisher and as an educator and a person that wants to inform our readership. That's really that's really a misnomer in the whole spectrum of housing options. And it's the term assisted living. Assisted living, anybody can name their facility an assisted living. As far as that's concerned, there is no state regulation as far as allowing you to say I'm an assisted living or I'm not an assisted living.
There's no specific
there's no
definition.
There's no specific definition. So what happens, it happens to confuse the readership, the market out there as to what really that entails.
The consumer.
There are 2 actual state licensed terms. And it's primarily due to the size of how many people can live into those facilities. The larger ones that are 20 people and over are called HFAs, which is homes for the aged. Okay, so the big facilities that have, whether it be nursing, care or just assisted living or whatever, skilled nursing, whatever, those home for aging are state licensed. You have to follow a certain criteria. You have to perform certain duties in order to be, on that list. And there's only 200 in the state as far as that size is concerned. The other size, the lower than 20, basically, are called AFCs, Adult Foster Care Communities. And it's, again, the only difference is the number of people they can have in their facility at one particular time, and they can go as little as 3 or 4, all the way up to 19 or whatever.
Adult foster care.
Adult foster.
AFC.
They're an adult foster.
Versus home for the aged.
Home for the aged.
So there's not a definition of living assisted.
Assisted living, right? There's no true definition. So a lot of the terminology in the public's mind gets mixed up on that. But there, with the AFCs, there's well over 5,000 of those in the state that are state regulated. The great thing about the state, and oftentimes we disregard what the state does for us sometimes, but the great thing about the state, they can actually go into any facility, licensed or unlicensed, for the protection of the aged or the disability, and say that, okay, you're performing these duties, you have to be licensed now.
Okay.
They're going to force you to license, or they'll shut you down.
Okay.
And so there is a protection in there, and the public needs to know that if their facility that they have their mom or their dad in is not licensed, that doesn't always mean a bad thing, but it means the fact that they have to be vigilant in knowing that they can and are allowed to only go so far for the care of their parent. Okay, they can't do certain things.
The caregivers, the employees,
the
can
employees,
only go so
right,
far.
Yeah, they can't do certain things or do certain things for more than X amount of days in a row in order to do it. So, but we explain that in the magazine and on our website as far as that's concerned. So that's an important thing that we really have tried to emphasize in trying to clear up a misunderstanding. Again, there are ones that are deemed assisted living, but they really have assistance in living. They'll help you bathe, or they'll help you shop, or they'll help you do this or do that, but they're not licensed facilities as far as that's concerned.
And you bring up something that makes me wonder, how can a person, for instance, say they have their parent living that the parent continues to live alone in their own dwelling, and they hire some help to come in to help them daily, a couple times a week, whatever. How can a family member and even the actual elderly person themselves be sure of who they're getting and to protect themselves?
It's important that if they're working with a caregiver agency, it's important that they do their homework with that caregiver agency. Reputable, unfortunately in the state, there is no license to be a caregiver agency. You can open it up tomorrow and start marketing yourselves as being able to go into somebody's home and care for somebody as a caregiver, and that's kind of that is scary. So it's important that the public do their research and do their due diligence as far as researching what that caregiver agency does. And one of the things that they should be asking the question is do they do background checks on those individuals that are going into the home?
And what type of background check?
And what type of background? Are they doing just a state or a local one, or are they doing a national one?
Yeah.
And are they continuously doing it over a period of time, every year or every couple years, to make sure that that person...
Would there be a bonding thing too?
And they should be bonded if there's any problem with all of that. There's also the fact that they should have, the caregiver agency should have workers' comp insurance. It's a law, in the state of Michigan. If you have X amount of employees, I think it's 3 or more employees, you have to by law have workers' comp. And what workers' comp does, and some of them try to skirt around this issue, saying, well, you have your own homeowners insurance, or we have liability insurance, and that'll cover any theft or damage or problems, even if the caregiver, for example, falls down the stairs in a person's home. They think, well, you'll be protected. Well, that's not true, because let's say the caregiver does fall down the stairs and has a spinal injury, and they're dependent for the rest of their lives, and the insurance runs out, that homeowner is on the hook. After the insurance money goes away. Workers' comp is a different thing. They can only be claim against workers' comp. They cannot go against any other policy, any other thing. Workers' comp will only pay what workers' comp will pay, and the homeowner's protected completely, the business is protected completely, and the individual is protected, because there's not going to be litigation beyond that, because it's a state law that says if a business has workers' comp and that employee is on part of that employee doing that job, that's the only thing that they can claim against. Against that workers' comp insurance from the actual caregiver organization.
Okay.
The homeowner is free and clear, and that's what they should require.
They're held harmless, basically.
Yes, and it's oftentimes unfortunate that people look at just price.
Right.
Because people off the street can come and knock on your door, or they'll have a neighbor, or they'll have a sister-in-law that can come in and watch. And oftentimes that is really a bad situation. Again, there's no regulations, there's no oversight on that person. That person could do anything they want to do in that home.
That opens a huge can of worms.
And you've seen the stories directly from yourself. I've seen the story where you have the caregiver misconduct. They're stealing the money.
Yes,
they're
or
stealing
drugs.
Possessions. They're
Too.
stealing the medications.
Yeah.
And they're not doing the job of what they're supposed to be
doing. So to recap that just a little bit, make sure that the people that are the caregivers have been screened.
Yep.
Background check.
Yep.
National, state, county, I guess, or city.
Yeah. Just national is the perfect because it takes everything as far as that's concerned. Because that caregiver may have moved from another state recently right into our area, and if they're just doing a state background check, nothing shows up. Oh, there's person's perfect. There's nothing wrong with that person, but that should always be done, and you should be able to view that report. Don't take the word.
The consumer should be able to?
Yeah.
Okay.
They should be able to see that report. Yeah, this person coming in, here's the background check.
Right.
This is what it is. And also, second is obviously the insurance, the workers' comp insurance. That is vital. That protects the homeowner from any injury or any misconduct as far as what's going on, especially any injury that comes in the home for that. And then, of course, the bonding. That person should be bonded for however much they want, that the homeowner feels is necessary as far as possession, as far as any theft that occurs, or any misdeeds as far as that's concerned.
And I would think referrals too. Who else have they cared for? The caregivers referrals, agency referral, and if there's no licensing for those agencies, as baby boomers continue to the growth of the aging population is just so astounding when you look at the numbers. I would think this would be something that legislators are going to have to address in the near future.
In many states, it's already a requirement. You have to be licensed. You have to go through a process. Unfortunately, Michigan is not one of those at this time. I hope they change their mind, or they prepare some sort of legislation that can start to do that. They've done a lot of great things over the last few years on elder abuse laws.
Right.
And that's the important part of it. They got to continue moving forward, and they've been doing very well. One of the catch-22s I think I've seen as a publisher is that our exploding growth of seniors, and there are a lot of very, very good people out there, independent people, as well as agencies and things like that, and it's needed. It's just the fact that we need to protect our seniors, and that's important. Even with all of that, the burden generally falls on a family member. Upwards of 80 or 90.
Have never made these decisions before.
Exactly, and upwards of 80-90% of all caregiving is done by a family member or a relative or some sort of close friend that's doing it, and it's needed. Those people are truly the unsung heroes of our generation, being able to oftentimes caring for two generations at the same time.
The sandwich generation. They're
doing their children, they're doing their parents, they've got their work, they've got
their own health
else.
issues, and
and that's important as well. So
I've seen advertised various caregiver support groups too.
Yes.
That's something I didn't participate in when I was taking care of my mom. I probably should have, but I always said it's like when you're caring for, particularly because she'd had strokes, so she had some mental and cognitive decline because of that, and she didn't feel well, and she was angry, and she had a lot of issues, and I always said that I'm the referee and the opponent.
Right,
I'm
right,
both, you know.
right, right. And it often becomes difficult for an adult child to switch roles because all of a sudden they're a child, they're a son, they're a daughter, and they all of a sudden have to switch roles to be a caregiver. And the role reversal, and that you have to take care of your parent. And often there's friction,
That's
obviously,
psychological
on
dynamics.
both sides.
Yeah.
You know, the child doesn't want to go so far because they
Right.
want to maintain a privacy, or this is how it's always been with their attitude,
Yeah.
and they're never going to change. So there's some pre-existing conditions, if you will,
Right.
going into that role. And oftentimes, an external caregiver can be a really good alternative as far as that's concerned, as well as some of the programs out there for respite care, the adult daycare programs that are really inexpensive compared to everything else. I mean, you can get into a great adult daycare situation where you're dropping off your mother or your father, and they have activities, they have the companionship, they have all the
Right.
things that they need instead of just sitting home
Yeah.
alone.
Yeah, and they get more physical activity. And then again, we need referrals for that
Yes.
too, to make sure that there's quality of care going on
Absolutely.
while the caregiver, child, whomever is at work.
Yeah.
Tell me your website again.
It's thebestofaging.com.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I'd like to invite our readers to take a look at that website and to see if they can also get a copy of the Housing Guide and also July's issue. You say this comes out twice a year.
Yep.
Are there changes, big changes between the summer and the
Well, it's just an education. We continue, again, we did it different. In addition to being a directory of all of the options, because most directories have only the advertisers that pay and participate
okay.
in it. So when somebody reads another publication and says that, okay, these are only my options, they won't realize that these are only the options that they paid to be in that publication.
So this is objective.
This is objective.
Okay.
In fact, we went one step further in actually partnering with a company, a referral service, a national referral service. It's called Assisted Transition.
Okay.
And these people will actually have local representatives that will, for free of charge, they will go and take you to different options.
Okay.
And help you make that
sort
decision
this all out.
based upon all the
Wow.
options out there. So
This is a wonderful, wonderful resource, and I thank you so much for your time.
thank you.
Again, this is Jeff Collison, the publisher and owner of The Best of Aging, and I'm Cindy Gray. My website is my name, Cindy Gray, GRAY.biz, B-I-Z, and I'd like to invite our viewers also to call in SWAC Studios. The number should be hopefully on the screen, and give us some ideas for some guests that you might want to suggest, or some topics that you might think that Mature Matters might be able to address for you. Fun stuff, educational things, interesting stuff, whatever comes to mind. So with that, we'll close. And again, thank you so much for being our guest.
Thanks, Cindy. I appreciate it.
You're very welcome.